Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because in 3 seconds you're about to meet Rafael Torres shirtless, dripping with sweat and staring at the most breathtaking woman the Sonoran Desert has ever spit out, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Ready? The dawn hadn't even finished painting the sky when it happened. Rafael stepped out of the adobe shack bare-chested, skin bronzed and scarred from a lifetime under merciless sun, jeans riding low on his hips, water bucket swinging in one fist. He was halfway to the well when he saw her. She stood between two ancient saguaros like she'd grown there overnight, tall, fierce, heartbreakingly beautiful. Dust clung to her brown skin like gold powder, her black hair fell in a thick braid over one shoulder, strands escaping to dance across her cheekbones in the hot wind. A faded calico dress, Apache patterns, torn at the hem, hugged her body the way the desert hugs secrets. Her eyes locked on him, dark and fearless, and the morning went dead quiet. The bucket slipped from his fingers. Water exploded across the cracked earth and disappeared in seconds. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 15 years of solitude had carved him hollow, but in that single heartbeat the emptiness cracked wide open and something raw and alive poured in. She didn't speak. Just lifted her chin a fraction, proud even while exhaustion trembled at the edges of her mouth. One thin strap of her dress had slipped off her shoulder, revealing a constellation of faint freckles across her collarbone. Rafael's pulse slammed so hard he felt it in his throat. 10 yards of sun-scorched dirt separated them, but it might as well have been nothing. The air itself felt charged, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. He took one involuntary step forward. She didn't retreat. And right then, beneath a sky bleeding fire and rose, Rafael Torres fell, hard, fast, and without a single word spoken. Welcome to the story that's about to ruin you for every other romance you've ever read. Keep that subscribe button smashed and notifications on. You still breathing? Good. Hold on tighter. Red heart. The space between them felt suddenly too small for the whole desert. Rafael's bare feet moved before his mind caught up. 1 step. 2. The hot sand burned his soles but he barely felt it. All he could feel was the pull, like gravity had shifted and she was the new center of the world. She watched him come, unblinking, chest rising in shallow breaths that lifted the torn neckline of her dress. When he was 3 feet away he stopped, afraid if he got any closer the morning would shatter. Up close she was even more impossible. A thin scar curved along her left jaw like a crescent moon, dust smudged across one cheekbone. Her lips were dry and cracked from the trail, but the shape of them still made his stomach drop. He found his voice, rough as creosote. You hurt? A small shake of her head. The braid slid across her shoulder when she moved. Lost? Another shake. Slower this time. Her eyes never left his. He swallowed hard. Then why are you here? The wind answered for her, whipping loose strands of her hair across her mouth. She lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, and tucked them behind her ear. The motion revealed a raw scrape along her wrist, fresh blood crusted at the edges. Rafael's heart lurched. Without thinking he reached for it. She let him. His fingers closed gently around her forearm, thumb brushing the edge of the wound. Her skin was furnace hot. Jesus, he muttered. You walked through Catclaw. 3 days, she said. Her voice was low, smoke over gravel, the first words she'd spoken and they slid straight into his bloodstream. Spanish rolled underneath the English like a secret. Maybe 4. I stopped counting when the water ran out. He should have asked who was chasing her. Should have asked her name. Instead the only thing that came out was, come inside. Let me clean that. She studied him for a long beat, eyes searching his face the way you searched the horizon for rain. Whatever she saw made something soften behind her gaze. She nodded once. He didn't let go of her arm. The inside of the cabin was dim and cool after the blaze of the sun. He guided her to the single chair by the table, pulled out the tin basin, poured water from the olla. She sat without being told, spine straight, hands resting on her thighs like a queen on a throne made of rough pine. He knelt in front of her, 34 years old and kneeling like a supplicant, and dipped a clean bandana in the water. When he pressed it to the scrape on her wrist she didn't flinch, only watched him with those river stone eyes. "I'm Raphael," he said quietly. "I know," she answered. He froze. "You know. Your name is burned into the brand on the cinch ring by the door. R. Torres." A tiny curve at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but close enough to stop his heart. "I've been watching the ranch since yesterday. Needed to be sure you were safe." Safe. The word hung between them like incense. He moved to the cut on her collarbone next, dabbing gently. She smelled like sun-baked earth and something sweeter, crushed desert willow maybe. Every time he leaned in, her breath ghosted across his temple. "And you?" he asked. "You got a name?" She hesitated. Then, "Lena. Just Lena. No last name." He didn't push. When the worst of the blood was gone he sat back on his heels, hands resting on his thighs so he wouldn't do something stupid like touch her face. "You hungry?" She gave a short laugh that sounded more like surrender than humor. "Starving." He stood too fast, suddenly aware he was still shirtless, that sweat still traced the line of his spine. He grabbed a clean cotton shirt from the trunk, shrugged it on without buttoning it, and set about making coffee and heating the beans he'd cooked 2 nights ago. Lena watched every move he made. When he slid a tin plate across the table, beans, a slab of cornbread, a jar of prickly pear jelly, she fell on it like a woman who'd forgotten food could taste like mercy. He sat opposite her, cradling his own coffee, unable to look away. Between bites she told him pieces, not the whole story, never that. Her band had been moving north along an old trail when riders hit them at dusk. Not border patrol. Not cartel. Something worse. Men with no badges and too many guns. Her grandfather had shoved her toward the arroyo and told her to run. She'd run for 4 nights, hiding in creosote and under rocks, drinking dew off saguaro spines. Raphael listened without interrupting, knuckles white around the mug. When she finished, the silence felt heavier than the adobe walls. Finally he said, "You're safe here." She looked up. "You don't know what you're promising." "I know exactly what I'm promising." Something electric moved across her face. She set the fork down, slow and deliberate, and reached across the table. Her fingertips brushed the back of his hand, calloused skin on calloused skin, and the contact burned hotter than the cook fire. "Raphael," she said, tasting his name like it was something sacred. "I can't stay long. They'll come looking. Then we'll make the time we have count." He turned his hand palm up, lacing their fingers together. She stared at the place they joined like she couldn't believe it was real. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the cabin gold. Inside, neither of them moved. Later, minutes, hours, he couldn't tell, he walked her to the porch to breathe air that didn't taste of blood and fear. She stood at the rail, looking out over the endless red and gold. He came up behind her, not quite touching, giving her the choice. She made it. Lena leaned back until her spine met his chest. His arms slid around her waist without asking permission, and she let them. He felt her exhale, long, shaky, like she'd been holding that breath since the night she started running. His lips found the soft place just below her ear. She tilted her head to give him more room, fingers curling around his forearms to anchor herself. When he pressed a kiss to the pulse hammering in her throat, she made a small sound, half sigh, half sob, that wrecked him completely. "Tell me to stop," he whispered against her skin. "Don't," she breathed. "Please don't." He turned her in his arms. The desert wind lifted her braid, wrapped it around his wrist like it was tying them together. Her hands came up to frame his face, thumbs tracing the stubble along his jaw, and then she kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was 4 days of terror and 15 years of loneliness colliding in the space between 2 mouths. She tasted like coffee and salt and something wild he wanted to spend the rest of his life chasing. He backed her against the porch post, hands sliding into her hair, loosening the braid until black silk spilled over his fingers. When they finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together, both of them were shaking. "I don't know how long I can keep you safe," he said, voice raw. "Then love me hard enough that it doesn't matter," she answered. That was the moment the desert gave them, one perfect, fragile morning before the world tried to take her back. He carried her inside, kicked the door shut behind them, and for the first time in 15 years the little adobe cabin stopped feeling like a tomb and started feeling like a heartbeat. Outside, the sun kept rising. Inside, two people who had forgotten how to hope learned all over again, skin to skin, breath to breath, promise to promise. And if the riders were already on her trail, tracking dust and broken mesquite, they were still miles away. For now, the desert belonged to Raphael and Lena. For now, that was everything. You know what to do, stay subscribed, notifications on. The next part is going to break your heart and put it back together all at once. The riders came at false dawn, 3 days later. Raphael heard them first, the low growl of engines carried on still air, the faint clink of metal that didn't belong to coyotes or wind. He was already awake, lying on his back with Lena curled against his chest, her braid tangled across his throat like a rope he never wanted cut. The moment the sound reached him, his arm tightened around her. She woke instantly. "They found me." He didn't waste words. He rolled out of bed, pulled on jeans and boots, grabbed the Winchester leaning by the door. Lena was already dressing, his old denim shirt swallowing her frame, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hem brushing mid-thigh. She looked like she belonged to him now, and the sight almost broke him. "Back window," he said. "Take the mare, head west through the lava rocks. I'll hold them." "No," she caught his wrist, fingers iron. "We do this together or not at all." He started to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him cold. Same look she'd worn the morning she appeared, half dead, all fire. He nodded once. They stepped onto the porch as the first dust cloud crested the ridge. For trucks, blacked-out windows, no plates. The lead vehicle stopped 50 yards out. Doors opened. 6 men fanned across the yard, rifles loose in their hands but ready. The man who walked forward wore a gray Stetson and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Morning, Torres," he called in perfect border Spanish. "Heard you've been keeping something that doesn't belong to you." Raphael leveled the Winchester. "State your business and ride out." The man's gaze slid past him to Lena. Something greedy and ugly lit his face. The girl for the old man's life. That was the deal her people broke. "We're just collecting." Lena stepped forward until she stood shoulder to shoulder with Raphael. "My grandfather died 2 nights ago," she said, voice steady as stone. "You put 3 bullets in him and left him for the vultures. There is no deal left to collect." The man's smile thinned. "Then we take what's owed in flesh." Raphael thumbed the hammer back. "Over my dead body. Works for me." The first shot came from the ridge behind the cabin, not from the men in the yard. A single crack, clean and perfect. The man in the gray Stetson dropped, hat spinning in the dirt, a neat red hole in the center of his forehead. Everyone froze. Then the desert came alive. Figures rose from the creosote and ocotillo like ghosts given bodies, Apache men and women, faces painted with ash and ochre, rifles older than the border but deadly in practiced hands. They moved in silence, fanning out, cutting off every escape. Lena's breath hitched. "Tia Clara," she whispered. An old woman stepped from the rocks, silver braids swinging, eyes fierce as a hawk's. She raised one hand. The warriors held fire. "This ends now," she called across the yard. "The girl is NDE. The land is NDE. You spilled blood on both. Leave your weapons and walk away, or join your dead." The remaining 5 men looked at their fallen leader, then at the circle of rifles glinting in the newborn sun. Something ancient and terrified moved across their faces. One by one, rifles hit the dirt. Tia Clara walked forward until she stood in front of Lena. She touched her niece's cheek with fingers that trembled only slightly. "I told your grandfather I would bring you home," she said softly. "He smiled before he left us. Said the desert gave you a good man to guard your heart on the way." Lena's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. She turned to Raphael. He was staring at the old woman like she'd just rewritten the sky. Tia Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You kept her safe. You kept our blood safe. The land remembers." She reached into her pocket and drew out a small turquoise bear on a leather cord. Placed it in Raphael's hand and closed his fingers over it. "This ranch is yours by sweat," she said. "Now it is yours by blood right too. No man will come here again without answering to us." She looked at Lena. "You choose, daughter. The people need you. But love is a rare thing. Rarer than water out here." Lena didn't hesitate. She stepped into Raphael's side, wrapped both arms around his waist, and rested her head over his heart. "I already chose," she said. The old woman smiled, small, fierce, approving. She signaled. The warriors melted back into the desert as quietly as they'd come. The 5 surviving men were bound with their own belts and left sitting in the dust. Someone would come for them later. Or not. When the sun finally cleared the mountains, the yard was empty except for 2 people and the smell of gunsmoke drifting away on the wind. Raphael looked down at Lena, thumb brushing the tear that had finally escaped. "You sure?" he asked, voice rough. "I got nothing but cracked adobe and a half-wild heart." She rose on her toes and kissed him, slow, deliberate, tasting like forever. "I crossed a desert on foot for you," she whispered against his mouth. "I think I can handle some cracked adobe." He laughed then, the first real laugh in 15 years, scooped her up, and carried her back across the threshold. Later, much later, when the stars came out bright enough to shame cities, they lay tangled on the narrow bed that was suddenly plenty big enough for 2. Raphael traced the turquoise bear now resting between her breasts. "So this means I'm Apache now," he teased. "It means you're mine," she answered. "The rest is details." Outside, the desert wind moved through the mesquite, soft as forgiveness. Inside, 2 hearts that had survived too much finally learned how to beat in the same rhythm. And somewhere out on the dark plains, coyotes lifted their voices in a song that sounded almost like celebration. The Sonoran Desert had taken everything from Rafael Torres once. This time, it gave him everything back. And he never let go again. The end. Thank you for writing this story with me. If it made you feel something real, share it with someone who needs to remember that even in the hardest places, love finds a way. Red Heart.